Get off me, keep off me, old dog. We'll see all over, wiped out. I see them give her up. Get off.
Okay, we are going to begin our discussion of the theater of the absurd with a poem that was written by Eliot. No, it was not written by Eliot. It was written by a friend of the generalist of this department, Craig Fleming, and it describes a trip taken to Disneyland with Eugene Ionesco and a well-known mime named Jack Albee. Now, Ionesco is one of the quote-unquote fathers of the absurd, and I use bunny ears because most of the writers within the theater of the absurd, as we refer to it now, pretty much always rejected that term. But we'll get to that in a minute. Anyways, this poem is entitled My Trip to Disneyland with Eugene Ionesco. Feel free to read along with me. Under the poem is playing an interview that was shot in 1961 with Ionesco himself, in which he discusses the war, his plays. Particularly, he touches on his Nazi resistance and his disbelief over the reaction of intellectuals during the war. A link to this interview, along with all of the other links, is available on your checklist. My trip to Disneyland with Eugene Ionesco. I went to Disneyland with Eugene Ionesco, his wife Rodica, and renowned mime Jack Albee. No, you didn't. The Mouseketeers are scrambling for reinforcements. You mustn't say Disneyland. You must say Disneyland. Disneyland is Disneyland. No, it isn't. Disneyland is Disneyland. How would you know if you've never been there? The pomegranates explode with trepidation and delight. Can you tell me the way to the train station? Be that as it may, I still insist that the phone rang and it was Jack Albee, no longer trapped in an ever-shrinking box, asking me if I wanted to go to Disneyland with Eugene Ionesco. It's not called Disneyland. It's called Disneyland. Are you telling me that it's not called Disneyland? It's called Disneyland? No, I'm saying the opposite. Yes, you are saying the opposite. No, I am not. Yes, you are. We're both saying the same thing. We are not saying the same thing. That is not what you are saying. That is what I am saying. What is what you are saying? What is not what I am saying? I'm saying that Jack came by and took me to Ionesco's hotel, and that he and his wife didn't speak a word of English, unless they did, but they didn't. Neither he nor his wife, neither he nor his wife, neither nor. How do you know? Because I was there. How could you be there if you were there? Because I sat there and we didn't talk. What did you talk about? We didn't. What? Talk about what? Nothing! What fun can I come to? Spending an hour in a hotel room with a mime and a world-renowned playwright who wrote about the absurdity of language but didn't speak a word of English was not quite the barrel of monkeys one would imagine. Was that the same barrel of monkeys who wrote the complete works of Shakespeare? We left the monkeys in the hotel room to go to Disneyland. Why do you insist upon calling it Disneyland when you didn't even go? I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to Eugene Ionesco. We communicated non-verbally through a mime. You had nothing to say to Eugene Ionesco and his lovely wife Rodica? Had anyone bothered to translate the story, would Ionesco have been interested in the fact that I played the 80-year-old lead in his play The Chairs at the ripe old age of 16 in high school? Perhaps, oh, I don't know, he would have found it absurd. Don't say absurd! Say absurd! That's what I was going to say. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Why didn't you say it to Eugene Ionesco? I did. Where? On the Matterhorn. You and Ionesco. On the Matterhorn. An e-ticket, very much so. On the Matterhorn with Ionesco, his wife, and a mime who shined an apple. A real apple? A pantomime apple. You shared a pantomime apple with Eugene Ionesco on the Matterhorn? Not really. He dropped it. Ionesco dropped the pantomime apple, and the mime dropped the subject, which was our trip to Disneyland. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. What was the subject? Yes! What was the subject? The hotel room, the chairs, the amusement, the horn growing from the middle of your forehead. There's nothing I can do about it. Is there anything you can do around it? Dance. Love to. The characters do cartwheels through the magical kingdom. My nipples contract in zestful anticipation. Forward the motion, the moon and the stars, the wonderful world of color. Have I lived it or dreamed it? Why would I lie? Why would I lie? Why would I lie to you? I want you to watch this before we have our conversation on The Goat, a week from Sunday. Why would I lie? The playwrights that are now associated with what has come to be known as the theater of the absurd would tell you that I have lied. I have lied. I've lied to you. I've lied in every email, every Illuminate, every discussion board. Everything I've said has been a lie. Why is that? It's because I'm trying to say something that is true. And therefore, what I'm saying is a lie. Remember at the top of class, we discussed paradoxes. We talked about the analog and the digital and theatricality, and we tried to reveal that the theater is difficult and that it often asks questions that are ultimately unanswerable, and that what makes it so special, so unique, so ultimately beneficial and influential is that it offers ambiguities as responses to these unanswerable questions. And we talked about how the things that are difficult and confusing and ambiguous and nebulous are often that way because they acknowledge powerful, powerful, uh, meaningful, complex, universal things, powerfully intrinsic things about existence. It's only in the nebulous that we find any kind of universality, any kind of shared humanity. Well, today we're going to take that a little bit further. Today we're going to revisit that moment in time in the late 19th century when a rift occurred. It was a rift between two things. You remember what they were? This one and this one. Realism and anti-realism. So we're going to look at one of the isms associated with anti-realism, with non-realism, and that ism is absurdism. The theater of the absurd is a movement that began in the 1940s that attacks logic and language and structure and character and plot development and everything that had come to be known as the theater. So it's very much a cannibalizing movement. It's attacking the thing that it was. And actually, it's not even a movement. It's a term that was coined by a critic named Martin Esslin, who wrote this book. There's much that the playwrights under the umbrella of the theater of the absurd do not share in common. But they do attack and reject similar things. So a lot of the work that was written by the playwrights under the umbrella of the theater of the absurd and elsewhere that was written after World War II is related to existential philosophy. So this is a world where really terrible, horrible things had just happened, where we were faced with the fact that human beings were capable of grotesque things that cannot be logically explained. So in a moment, you'll see, like Camus rejected the title existential and his connection to Sartre, just like the absurdist playwrights like Ionesco and Beckett rejected the title absurd and their connection to Camus. All right, let's go to logic and, more importantly, language. What is language? Language is, to put it in words that would make sense to all of us, language is a system that creates and catalogs meaning so that we can share it, right? And now the absurdists were saying that in a universe which cannot be explained, the use of language as a system to relate or organize meaning, constructed or intrinsic or extrinsic meaning, is entirely absurd. In a universe where the things that happened in World War II happen, the attempt to explain meaning in the world with language is absurd. And the more we make claims with language, the more they fall apart. So language is a system for cataloging meaning. If you take it away, we can't share meaning, right? So we need language to share meaning. But paradoxically, ironically, language destroys all meaning because it's built on logic. And logic looks good on paper, especially in like really strictly ordered, rigid, scientific, empirical worlds. But logic breaks down really, really easy. Let's go back to Aristotle. Who is he?
Aristotle, in 90 minutes. Introduction. Aristotle was perhaps the first and the greatest of all.
An hour and a half, 90 minutes of Aristotle. And you may not have 90 minutes for Aristotle right now, and that's okay, maybe you should. But the fact is, we all know who Aristotle is already, and we all talked about Aristotle this semester already when we talked about the Poetics and mimesis, imitation. Aristotle was a philosopher, so he thought about everything. And one of the things he thought about was logic, and he explored logic through a device called a syllogism. A syllogism is a kind of logical argument in which one thing is inferred, one proposition is inferred from two others. So you know two things, and then you know a third from those two things. Here's the most famous one. All men are mortal. Aristotle's man. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. And then syllogisms involve varying arrangements of subjects and middle terms and predicates and other terms. And if you Google the word syllogism, there are tons of sites and information out there. There are people who are obviously big syllogism dorks out there. Produce syllogism. I shouldn't have said that. The troubling thing about language and logic is that they break down rather easily. They really do. I'm going to write 2 sentences right now on your screen. This is a logical paradox. These 2 sentences can't exist together without your brain melting. It hurts your head to look at those 2 things. The same thing can be done with a syllogism. We can create terms that together break down the entire construct of the logic on which the syllogism is built. And now we're beginning to hear echoes of the absurdists who are attacking the very thing which they are creating, the structure of the very thing which they are creating, a play, the theater. Here's another one. Zeno, who's a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, about 5 centuries before the Common Era, set up a paradox that showed, among other things, that basically movement is impossible, that the fastest runner on Earth could not catch up with the slowest runner on Earth, as long as the slowest runner is moving, even very, very, very slowly, and gets just a tiny head start. So the tortoise says, "I'll beat you, Achilles, if you give me a 10-meter head start." Achilles laughs. He's an amazing athlete. He says, "No problem, I got this." So when the tortoise gets to 10 meters, which is about 30 feet, Achilles takes off running, right? He catches the tortoise almost instantly. But by the time he gets to that 10-meter mark where the tortoise was, in the time that it took him to run, the tortoise has gone another, like, maybe about a foot. 10 meters is about 30 feet. But Achilles can catch up with that foot really, really quickly. But by the time he catches up to that foot, the tortoise has yet moved again. Another fraction of a foot, another fraction of a meter. And by the time he moves to the place where the tortoise was that time, the tortoise has moved yet again. Now the increments are getting smaller and smaller. But Achilles can never catch up, because no matter how quickly he's moving, nor how slowly the tortoise is moving, no matter how short the period of time that it takes Achilles to catch the tortoise, it's enough time for the tortoise to advance yet again. And even if the tortoise advances an infinitesimally small distance, it's still, that distance takes time for Achilles to advance forward. And while he's advancing forward yet again, no matter how quickly that happens, the tortoise moves forward again. Reductio ad absurdum, proof by contradiction. Now, this kind of logical paradox, and especially that brain-melting loop, the following sentence is true, the preceding sentence is false, that we looked at earlier, is explored in far more detail in an excellent radio show called Radio Lab that I've posted on your link list, on your checklist for this video. So please do take the time to check that out. It's really, really interesting. The idea here is, of course, that logic and language fail us. They fail all of us at one point or so I was really excited, you guys. I had gotten an up-and-coming playwright. He's had some really great shows just open on New York, not on Broadway, but just off Broadway. And he was going to come in, he was going to come down to my house and talk to you guys about the process of creating theatrical literature, of writing for the stage, and then watching the genesis of something new as he puts that piece of art in the hands of a production team to create this new sort of communal ritual that we've been discussing for the past few weeks. Unfortunately, he's ill. I think he has dysentery, which I probably shouldn't tell you. But I did get someone new, and he's just as good. I did find him at a McDonald's drinking coffee, but he assures me that he knows a lot about certain playwrights, and that he can give us a really, really exciting presentation about the way that theatrical literature moves to the stage, and the way that we find context, and the way that we create meaning out of that literature as we interact with it in the alive world of the stage. And he promises me that it's going to be really, really exciting. So without further ado, I'm really happy to welcome Paul Rowland. Give it up, everyone, for Paul Rowland. Right this way, Mr. Rowland.
I just want a cup of hot coffee. Okay. Yes. So I took advantage of being at the seaside to lay in a store of sucking stones. They were pebbles, but I call them stones. I distributed them equally between my 4 pockets and sucked them, turn about. This raised a problem, which I first solved in the following way. Now, I had, say, 16 stones, 4 in each of my 4 pockets, these being the 2 pockets of my greatcoat and the 2 pockets of my trousers. Taking a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat and putting it in my mouth, I replaced it in the right pocket of my greatcoat by a stone from the right pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my greatcoat, which I replaced by the stone that was in my mouth as soon as I had finished sucking it. Thus, there were still 4 stones in each of my 4 pockets, but not quite the same stones. And when the desire to suck took hold of me again, I drew again on the right pocket of my greatcoat, certain of not taking the same stone as the last time. And while I sucked it, I rearranged the other stones in the way I have just described, and so on. But this solution did not satisfy me fully, for it did not escape me that by an extraordinary hazard the 4 stones circulating thus might always be the same 4, in which case, far from sucking the 16 stones turn and turn about, I was really only sucking 4, always the same, turn and turn about.
And that was Paul Rowland reading an excerpt from the novel Malloy, a novel written by the playwright Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett is one of the playwrights associated with the theater of the absurd. The excerpt goes on, I might do better to transfer the stones 4 by 4 instead of 1 by 1. That is to say, during the sucking, to take the 3 stones remaining in the right pocket of my greatcoat and replace them by the 4 in the right pocket of my trousers, and these by the 4 in the left pocket of my trousers, and these by the 4 in the left pocket of my greatcoat, and finally these by the 3 from the right pocket of my greatcoat, plus the 1, as soon as I had finished sucking it, which was in my mouth. It goes on for pages and pages, arguing the complex logic involved in moving these stones around his 4 pockets in such a way that he can suck each stone 1 by 1 in succession without sucking one twice. In the end, he decides to throw away all of the stones but 1, which he later loses or throws away or swallows. Language and logic fail us. Now, we can make all kinds of arguments about the symbolism in this excerpt from the novel Malloy. Those stones can be anything you like. Can those stones be American politics? Oh, you bet. Absolutely. Is American politics, our 2-party system, all about shuffling stones, money from one pocket to another, all be for absolutely nothing in the end? Is it all a pointless, useless Sisyphean task of moving these stones, shuffling these stones around? Absolutely. Could we call it the inanity of war? Sure. Could it be representative of most of the interpersonal relationships in our lives? You bet. There's all kinds of symbolism we can attribute to an excerpt like that. But more importantly, it represents an attack on language. It represents using language in a way that points out not only the failures of language, but the failures in the ways that we use language in our popular culture, in our relationships. The theater of the absurd is a term coined by the Hungarian-born critic Martin Esslin. Most of the writers in this style rejected the word and the classification, which makes sense because they were rejecting a lot of form and structure, and of course they would reject their own writing and work as a classifiable structure. And also keep in mind that the universe in which these playwrights were writing was the universe of Camus in 1942, The Myth of Sisyphus. Defined the human condition as basically meaningless. Camus argued that humanity had to resign itself to recognizing that a fully satisfying and rational explanation of the universe is beyond its reach, and that the world has to be seen, in the end, as basically absurd. This is from the intro to Martin Esslin's book on absurdism. Such a sense of loss of meaning must inevitably lead to a questioning of the recognized instrument for the communication of meaning, language. Consequently, the theater of the absurd is to a very considerable extent concerned with a critique of language, an attack above all on fossilized forms of language which have become devoid of meaning. The conversation at the party, which at one moment seemed to be an exchange of information about the weather or new books or the respective health of the participants, is suddenly revealed as an exchange of mere meaningless banalities. And guys, we do this all the time. We saw it in Wit with, "How are you? Fine." We do it every day. Sup? What's up? Nothing. Meaningless banalities. The people talking about the weather had no intention whatever of really exchanging meaningful information on the subject. They were merely using language to fill the emptiness between them, to conceal the fact that they had no desire to tell each other anything at all. In other words, from being a noble instrument of genuine communication, language has become a kind of ballast filling empty spaces. And equally, in a universe that seems to be drained of meaning, the pompous and laborious attempts at explanation that we call philosophy or politics must appear as empty chatter. Now again, this universe is the universe of the existentialists and of Camus. Now, it's important to note that Camus rejected the title existential, much like the absurdists whose work is often cited as a direct descendant from the writing of Camus, reject the title of absurd. So all of these guys are saying none of these things are independent. They're all new ideas. They all have a genesis in themselves, but clearly they are interdependent. And I like pointing that out because it leads us back to one of our themes from The Shape of Things, does it not? Back to Esslin. In Waiting for Godot, for example, Beckett parodies and mocks the language of philosophy and science in Lucky's famous speech. Harold Pinter, whose uncanny accuracy in the reproduction of real conversation among English people has earned him the reputation of having a tape recorder built into his memory, which reveals the bulk of everyday conversation is largely devoid of logic and sense. That it is in fact nonsensical. It is at this point that the theater of the absurd can actually coincide with the highest degree of realism. For if the real conversation of human beings is in fact absurd and nonsensical, then it is the well-made play with its polished logical dialogue that is unrealistic, while the absurdist play may well be a tape-recorded reproduction of reality. Or, in a world that has become absurd, the theater of the absurd is the most realistic comment on, the most accurate reproduction of reality. Now, clearly, guys, we are no longer living in the 20th century. Our aesthetic has changed and the world has changed, but I think that much of this has remained the same. Clearly, we still live in an absurd world, and clearly, any attempts to lay out dogmatic absolutes about the way it works and logical constructs that dogmatically bring us through any situation are entirely absurd. Plus, if you were to read a transcript of your day, you would see that it is closer to absurd than realistic. Reality is absurd. And we don't want to think so. We want it to be easy and simple and absolute. Or like Kurt Vonnegut says, we want it to confirm the signs and symbols and the language and forms with which we've become accustomed. Estlin, in the conclusion of this introduction, says, "The shedding of easy solutions, of comforting illusions, may be painful, but it leaves behind it a sense of freedom and relief. And that is why, in the last resort, the theater of the absurd does not provoke tears of despair, but the laughter of liberation." This idea that the shedding of easy solutions, of comforting illusions, can be painful, but it is freedom, is another theme that I think is developed over the body of work that we're reading this semester. So I want you to look forward to the play Doubt, especially when you're thinking about this idea of the shedding of easy solutions, how living in doubt may actually give you more freedom than these dogmatic rhetorical absolutes. When we read absurdist drama, we feel angry, we feel annoyed, we kind of have this knee-jerk reaction like, oh God, what is this crap? It doesn't make any sense. My favorite playwright, Sam Beckett, says, "Here, form is content. Content is form." You complain that this stuff is not written in English. It is not written at all. It is not to be read, or rather, it is not only to be read. It is to be looked at and listened to. His writing is not about something. It is that something itself. This is Sam Beckett talking about James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Writing is not about something. It is that something itself. What does that mean? It means that the theater, the writing, the art, it is the thing. That the whole, the ambiguity and the suspension of not knowing, the seeking the act of making the art, of putting pen to paper is far more meaningful than any logical construct built through specific individual language, built through dialogue, built through narrative and plot development. The act, the writing is not about something. It is that something itself. The playwrights that are loosely grouped under the label of the absurd are always trying to convey a sense of bewilderment, of anxiety and wonder in the face of an inexplicable universe. So, according to Estlin, there's 5 defining playwrights of the movement, and they are Eugene Ionesco, Samuel Beckett, Jean Genet, Arthur Adamov, and Harold Pinter. There are many other playwrights that are either loosely or directly associated with this kind of theater. Tom Separd, Friedrich Dürrenmatt, Peter Weiss, Václav Havel, and Edward Albee. You have read or are reading Edward Albee's play The Goat, which we will discuss next week. Ionesco says, "I have been called a writer of the absurd." This is one of those terms that go around periodically. It is a term that is in fashion at the moment and will soon be out of fashion. It is vague enough now, in any case, to mean nothing anymore and to be an easy definition of everything. Ionesco preferred the theater of ridicule. Arthur Adamov said, "Life is not absurd, only difficult. Very, very difficult." He committed suicide in 1970, by the way. The theater of the absurd aims to strip the theater of everything that it has been drawn to since the dawn of our human consciousness. Plot, psychologically derived characters, stock situations, stock narratives, stock people, the actual link between cause and effect, the bias toward realism, which, as we have discussed, is not actually realistic. Historical background, clearly defined, logical, apparent reasons for the dramatic conflict. All of it is in a world that is intrinsically illogical. All of it is vague and convenient. ego. If you strip it away, if you tear it away, if you tear away the Aristotelian plot with its exposition, inciting incident, rising conflict, climax, falling conflict, denouement, you're left with a kind of pure theater. Pure theater is theater that goes beyond what we expect. Because everything we expect, guys, is just that. It's what we expect, and no more. It's founded on faulty logic. And it is not truth. It's only comfortable and convenient. The theater of the absurd is not absurd. It's trying to peel back the layers. And what we find under the layers when we peel them back is often difficult, uncomfortable, grotesque, strange, maybe even seemingly inappropriate. And many of you may feel this way about the goat. You may ask yourself, why would my teacher have me read this crap? Great. Bring that passion to the discussion. Albie wants you to have that reaction. I want you to have that reaction. We are looking to discuss the very structures on which we build our perspective, on which we build the way we see the world. When we tear them away, we're going to feel alone. We're going to feel that we're in a vacuum and that we don't know which way is up. Well, I would argue, I think that Samuel Beckett would argue, I think that UNESCO would argue, and I think that Edward Albee would argue, that we don't know which way is up, that life is complex and difficult, and that we need to get out and jump in anyways, even when we don't know which way is up. Okay, please go have a look at all of the links that I've provided on the checklist with this video. There's a lot of stuff to look at. There's some really great produced Samuel Beckett material that I've linked to. Do listen to that edit from Radiolab and take a look at all the other links. I will see you guys next week when we illuminate The Goat by Edward Albee.